Bom dia, boa tarde, boa noite, or whatever the case may be. My name is Marcus, and I am the host of the Black Brazil Today YouTube channel, as well as the blackbraziltoday.com blog, where I analyze Brazil from the perspective of race. So today I have to talk about a news report that came out in Brazil's top newspaper, Folha de São Paulo. I always compare it to the New York Times, most important newspaper in Brazil. And recently, a report came out by one of Folha de São Paulo has a report, like a statistical data analysis arm of the newspaper, and they put out all types of reports about Brazilian society. So a recent report came out, and it said, according to studies, 6 of 10 mixed brown people don't consider themselves black. Now, I have to remind you, as always, when I say brown, what does that mean? The term pardo is what's used in Brazil for people who don't define themselves as strictly black, meaning, or preto in Portuguese, branco, which means white in Portuguese, those who call themselves indigena, which means indigenous people, Native Americans, Native Brazilians, if you will, or amarelo, which means people who are of Asian ancestry who live in Brazil. So the reason why I wanted to talk about this particular story is because it reaffirms what I've been saying for a while now. As I've always acknowledged, when I first started studying Brazil in the year 2000, I was under the impression, according to what Black activists had always said, that pardo plus preto equals the Black population in Brazil, meaning brown or people of mixed race plus specifically Black people. Put those two together and you come up with the Black population. So then for years, the numbers would keep going up. They're saying, okay, we have 85 million Black people. We have 90 million. We've reached 100 million. And it was like 110, 120 million. And through my travels to Brazil all over these years and the 9 years that I lived in Sao Paulo, I had to start moving away from that position because I was seeing the reality of what the diversity of looks that you have in Brazil. And I had to conclude that there are a lot of people who are considered pardos, people of whatever degree of mixed race. They could be black and white, they could be indigenous and white, they can be black and Indian, whatever. Some of those people fall closer to the black side, even being mixed. Some of those people fall closer to the indigenous side, even being mixed. Some of those people, even though in the white category, you have people who can classify themselves as white, but they know they have mixed heritage as well. So I've talked about this in numerous videos just this year alone. If you look at some of the videos that I've done in recent months, check out some of these videos and you can confirm that this is when I had to change my position on how many Black people live in Brazil. And I'm going to show you the article where I had to start stating that I have changed my position on this. But look at some of my past videos, some of the titles of some of those past videos just in the last couple of months. The difficulty of self-declaration. The video where I said Brazil now has 6 quote unquote Black mayors, where there were these 6 guys, and of those 6 of Brazilian capital cities, only one of them I could have said you could consider Black. The rest of them look like white guys who have suddenly taken on a pardo or mixed identity. Check out that video. Check out the video where I said for Brazil's elites, there were inferior mixed race people who are closer to white, and superior mixed race people who are fit closer to the white phenotype, and the inferior mixed race people who are closer to Black or indigenous. That's another video. Check out the video where I talked about my baby was brown, now he's Black. Why Brazil stats on race and color can't be seen as accurate. Check that video out. And you'll see, I've long said now that even though I can say I understand that all pardos are not Black, the problem is that the pardo or mestizo, both meaning, brown or mixed race people, they're arguing that no pardo should be considered Black. So I'm somewhere in the middle of these two ideologies. One, on the movimento negro, the Black social movement argument, says that all pardos are part of the Black population, and they come up with a figure like 115, 120 million people in Brazil are Black. I don't agree with that. I think that's they've stressed that a little bit too far. You've got a lot of pardos in there who are pretty close to white. They're just not, purely of European ancestry. On the other hand, I disagree with what the pardo mestizo movement is saying, that no pardo is black. And I've maintained, I accept the fact that I don't think we can ever know how many black people there are in Brazil, because it just depends on what your viewpoint is. But I have steadily said, I could say the pardo population within the pardo category, which is estimated at about 93 million people, I'm safe. I feel safe to say that somewhere between 25 to 33 and possibly 40% of those pardos could be considered black. These people are just probably not the darkest crayon in the box. So then, to me, I come up with a figure. If you put 22, 23 million, put at those, meaning you're strictly black, along with, maybe a third to 40% of pardos who I would consider black, you put those two numbers together and you come up with about 60, 65 million black people. That would be closer to what I would estimate, somewhere between 60 and 75 million. That's what I would say if I was taking an educated guess. So in reality, today's article kind of validates what I was saying all along. Why am I saying that? I'm going to get into that and explain this a little bit more, as I always have to put things into context. So let's get into this video for today. Okay, so as I'm saying, take a look at this picture here. This is a picture that was taken from, it might be from the book A Cabeça dos Brasileiros, and it explains how Brazilians think. And this question of the question here wasn't about specifically race or color. What they were doing in this particular picture is that they were showing people in Brazil these pictures of these 8 men and asking, all of these men are basically dressed the same, have on the same type of shirt, and people were saying, based on what they look like, what type of profession do you think they have? And it was always, when you see a white guy wearing something and a black guy wearing the same thing, they're always going to look at the white guy as being in a superior position. If this white guy is wearing a shirt like this, he might be a college professor. If he's a black guy, he might be, I don't know, like somebody's, a limousine driver or something. They consistently show, you put a white man in a suit and people think he's like an executive in a bank. You put a black man in a suit and he's probably the security guard at the mall. So that's what this picture is about here. But what I wanted to show is that, look at the phenotypes here. You find these type of faces all over Brazil all the time. What do I think? How will I classify these people? I see this guy as white. This guy is mixed. He's a pardo, but I think he leans more towards the black side, as opposed to this pardo here. He looks like he leans a little bit more to the indigenous side. This guy looks white to me. This guy looks black to me. This guy looks black to me. This guy is black. And this is what I'm saying about what a pardo can look like. He's clearly black, but he just has lighter skin. This guy, he looks like somebody who might be white, might be partly indigenous, but he has a face of what they associate with lighter skinned people in the northeast of Brazil. So this is what I'm saying. Any of these guys here, particularly this guy, this guy, this guy, this guy, they can all be considered pardos. Whereas I see these two guys as clearly black. I see this guy as clearly black, but according to the color scheme, he would probably be listed as pardo. This is why I'm saying color and race can be kind of an issue that can be kind of confusing. But the story that I'm going through today, it substantiates what I've long been saying. All pardos aren't black, but maybe 33 to 40% of them are. My position, I've stated my position is somewhere between the movimento negro classification of black and the movimento pardo mestizo definition of what a pardo is. I also want to point out that there's been numerous articles that I've seen over the last 20, 25 years that show consistently, when people judge what people look like according to how that person identifies himself, a person who sees himself as a pardo, and then the person who's doing the research looks at that person and say, nah, that guy's black. He might identify himself as pardo, but I see him as black. So it says past research has shown that at least 25% of mixed brown people were judged to be black by the person who's classifying them. So, which I've always asked, what's is more important, the self-identification or the classification by the other person? Which is why I say we can never know how many black people there actually are in Brazil, but I'm closer to saying between 60 and 75 million people. Okay, so let's get into the article. According to a study, 6 of 10 mixed brown people, or pardos, don't consider themselves negros, as they say in Brazil, or black. Most people who call themselves, today's article is by Victoria Damasceno. So most people who call themselves brown in Brazil don't identify as black, according to the Datafolha survey. While 40% of brown people consider themselves black, 60% say they don't see themselves as such. Among blacks, 96 or pretos, 96% consider themselves black and 4% do not. So then you have 4% of the people in the preto category who might define themselves as pardos. This goes back to the article where I said, when you're talking about race and color in Brazil, you can't look at the stats as being completely accurate because it depends on who's talking. It depends on the opinion of the person speaking. The survey interviewed 2,004 people in 113 municipalities throughout Brazil, including metropolitan regions and cities in the interior of all regions of Brazil between November 5th and November 7th. The survey took into account people over the age of 16 and has a margin of error of 2 percentage points for total sample, 5 points for blacks, 4 points for whites, and 3 points for brown. Okay. I'm going to talk about this lady in a minute here. This is, looks like Rebecca Quintão. She's a project leader. She's a resident of the city of Recife, which is the capital city of the northeastern state of Pernambuco. She's among those who consider themselves pardo or brown, but don't see themselves as black. The daughter of a black mother and a white father, she grew up watching her mother suffer racism for having a lighter skinned daughter. Take a look at this young lady. So she identifies herself as pardo. Now I'm not taking away from her self-identity. She can identify however she wishes, but I'm saying, looking at her features, I'm quite sure she's probably dyed her hair, bleached her hair blonde. But according to her facial features, she looks like a black girl to me. That's just me. I'm not taking away from her self-identity. She literally is a pardo. I'm just saying she leans more towards the black side, in my opinion. Okay, so she says, people said she was my nanny, talking about her mother. People said she was my nanny and couldn't be my mother. She says, goes back to a video I did some time back, where when darker skinned black women give birth and have children that are lighter skinned in Brazilian society, sometimes they are mistaken to be the child's babysitter because of the difference in skin color. It's always automatically assumed a darker skinned woman with a lighter skinned child, she must be the babysitter or the nanny. She has also heard since childhood that she's too dark to be white. While she has never seen herself as black, the term pardo came as an answer to her doubts. I feel very unfeasible, she says. I'm too dark to be white, but I'm also too light to be black. I have a big mouth. I have the whole body of a black person, my eyes, my nose, my hair, everything, but I have lighter skin. So listen to what she's saying. She's actually saying that her features tell her that she looks black, but she has very fair skin. So the logical choice for her would be that she's a parda. But it seems to me that she acknowledges that her features are black. Again, somebody else might see it another way. I think she's saying that she's a parda that leans towards the black side. And this is something that I've said all the time. I'm not denying that there are pardos. I'm just saying that a lot of pardos have more of a black phenotype, and at least 25, 33, maybe 40% of pardos identify themselves as being black, even having the color of a pardo. Now, a pardo has a variety of skin colors. You come from this very fair-skinned woman to a browner skinned person. A pardo can look like almost anything, to tell you the truth. Let's see, where was I? Okay, let's talk about this guy. Business administrator Danilo Machado, 37, from Sao Paulo, is among those who consider themselves brown and black. So listen to what he's saying. He was raised by an adoptive family. He says that his biological mother was white while his father was black. His lighter skin left doubts at first, but understanding the social context in which he lived, as well as the difficulties he faced because of racism, was the path to him finding his place of belonging in blackness. It's actually a discovery because, unfortunately, we live in a society in which this whiteness has been planted, he says, referring to the theory that the white population has always had privileges that have been passed down for generations. So we tend not to see ourselves the way we are. Now, it's funny because this guy, basically, you get a lot of people in Brazil who say, look, eu sou negro de cor parda. Eu sou preto de cor pardo, which means I'm a black person of a brown skin tone. So apparently that's what this guy is seeing. I see from his hair texture, that's clearly a black hair texture. I don't know. He's somewhere in the middle, but this is an example of what I'm talking about. So when the pardo movement says all pardos are, you can't count pardos. No pardos are black. They're all just pardos. And these people, based on their social experiences, are saying, yeah, I might have this skin color. but based on my experiences, I'm treated as I'm black. I understand that I'm not white, so I'm a person of color. So I think it's a mistake. It's a mistake for the movimiento negro to claim all pardos as black, but it's also a mistake of the movimiento pardo mestizo to say no pardos are black. So that's why I'm saying I'm somewhere in the middle in this position. The idea that the black category is given by the sum of blacks and browns came about in the Brazilian black movement. The defense, which intensified in the 1990s, was based on studies that showed that brown people had the same or something close to social economic conditions closer to black people than to white people. For this reason, they put them in the same categories. Years later, in 2010, during the second administration of President Lula da Silva, who is currently serving his third term, the law establishing the statute of racial equality was sanctioned, which defined the black population as the group of people who declare themselves as pretos and pardos, meaning black and brown. Experts interviewed by Fordia said that the brown category is in fact heterogeneous and that the percentage of those who don't see themselves as black can be attributed to indigenous ancestry. The Brazilian political moment and the lack of knowledge that blackness includes different skin tones. So this is another point that I made. Within that pardo category, you have people who look close to white, but are just not purely white. You got people who lean towards the indigenous look, people who lean towards the black look. You have people who you simply can't classify as one, according to one race or color. Okay. So all of these people are within this pardo group. For historian Luciana Burito, a professor at the Federal University of Recôncavo, Baiano, the presence of an ongoing political project in Brazil that is based on anti-black discourse would impact racial identity politics or policies that have been decisive for the self-knowledge of the black population. This political setback obviously reflects on the racial identity of the Brazilian people. At the same time, none of this reduces the numbers of racial violence, she says. So what she's saying there is that no matter how you slice it, when you look at the statistics, pardos and pretos are going to be the ones who are the most victimized by violence in Brazil, whether it's racial violence or it's violence, say, for example, everyday street violence or violence perpetrated by the federal police. People who are clearly white are not really affected much by this, not in the numbers that affect the pardo and preto population. She also says that there is an imagery which has been strengthened by the promotion of mestiçagem or racial mixture in Brazil, that black people are only people with dark skin. And like I said, we know that that's not true. Imagine any society where there's black people, where you only consider people who are the color of, I always use Michael Jordan, Wesley Snipes, Flavor Flav. There are people in Brazil who sell Georgie in Brazil. If you only count those people, the darkest people in the spectrum of colors that define blackness, if you only consider those people black, there's a lot of black people who would not be considered black, which is what she's saying here. There are other conditions, other phenotypes, noses, mouths, and hair, which determine our living conditions, she says. The social condition of this pardo person brings them closer, situates them, and reaffirms them as black. For Veronica Tosti Daflon, a professor in the sociology department of the Fluminense Federal University and the author of, I'm going to translate this, So Far, So Close, Identities, Discrimination, and Stereotypes of Blacks and Browns in Brazil. Another reason for the discrepancy between those who declare themselves brown but not black lies in their ancestry, which may be indigenous rather than African, something that I have acknowledged. When you go into states like the Amazon, for example, it's a mistake to classify all those pardos as black, because we know that in the northern states of Brazil, the predominant phenotype is going to be indigenous. So it's misleading to say all pardos in the Amazonas, you should consider them all black, because they're not. Probably a smaller population, but we even know that many indigenous people have identified themselves as pardos for a number of years. So that pardo category encapsulates a range of phenotypes. Let me see here. Others don't identify with the black political identity either because they have a different worldview or because they perceive themselves differently as part of a multiracial family, for example. Some self-declared pardos or brown people also hesitate to claim to be black because they believe they don't face the same discrimination as clearly black people. Data from the Datafolha shows that 17% of pardos say they have felt discriminated against because of their color, while among black people, the figure is 56%. In the case of whites, the figure drops to 7%. Okay. Now, I also want to throw in this idea of people only feeling they feel that 17% of pardos or brown people saying they felt discrimination. I've seen too many cases in Brazil where people were probably the victims of racial discrimination and they just didn't recognize it. So that 17% that could be a vast undercount, because if people don't perceive that they're being discriminated against because of their color, if they don't perceive it, they're not going to report it as racism, right? The survey also shows that 65% of the Brazilian population considers the black category to be the sum of blacks and browns. Among blacks, the figure is even higher at 77%. And although most of the brown population doesn't identify as black, the majority also believe that the sum of blacks and browns equals the total number of blacks. So they're saying more than 2/3 of pardos acknowledge that the sum of blacks and browns equates to the population of the black population in Brazil. And as I'm saying, I'd say 1/3 to maybe 40% of pardos could be considered black. I'm not going to say all pardos are black for the reasons that I just stated. The contradiction, according to Datafolha, is common. She says that since 2010, when the statute of racial equality was created, the population has heard more often that blacks are the sums of black and brown, which could justify agreeing with that statement. It's been promoted for a couple of decades now that pretos and pardos equal the black population, the população negra, as they say. At the same time, when people reflect on the individual case, they may disagree. It's normal to hold contradictory ideas without much reflection, this person said. The debate about who should or shouldn't be considered black is gaining traction with the racial quota policy, which reserves places in higher education and public and private sectors for black, brown, and indigenous people. Experts say that the group should be kept as beneficiaries. Marceli Felix, sociologist and deputy research coordinator at the Group for Multidisciplinary Studies on Affirmative Action at the State University of Rio de Janeiro, says that the similarity between the socioeconomic data of the two groups has been consistently shown in recent years, or rather consistently shown in research over the years, and that is why the cutoff should be maintained. She's saying again here, socioeconomically, pretos and pardos are in the same boat. They're both at a disadvantage almost completely equally in comparison to the white population, which again is another reason why they want to put pretos and pardos in the same group. Even if you consider pardos who are more of indigenous ancestry, they still are part of the group that will face discrimination vis-a-vis the white population. The difficulty of social ascension among pretos and pardos, blacks and browns, is an indication that these groups suffer greater obstacles due to racial discrimination, even if these groups don't always have this perception, he or she says. Now, what I want to do right now is, this is a guy that I like checking out his Instagram channel, and I use his material from time to time. He comes from the Afro Estima 2 IG page. I forget his name. Marcelo. I'm not remembering his name right now, but this is a guy who I've followed quite a bit of his material. Instead of just doing a pure overdub today, I'm going to credit him for what I'm going to read over the next 2 to 3 minutes. This is what he posted on this topic either yesterday or the day before. Okay. So what he says, look at this article in Folha de São Paulo, which says that according to Datafolha, 6 out of 10 brown people don't consider themselves to be negros or black. And it's good to comment on this article because soon the brown emancipation movements will be appearing saying that the black movements are wrong, that they should take their hands off our brown people, and that whole litany that we already know. He's talking to a couple of people online, but I know specifically he might be referring to the IG page known as Partitude, who I've used some of her material as well. As I've said repeatedly, I agree with some of her stuff. I disagree with some other stuff. She has been one of the people who has said that take your hands off of the pardos. They don't belong to the black population. I'm affirming not all pardos are black, but a percentage of them are. And there was recently a case that just came out, another controversial situation of racism that shows, okay, are pardos, mulattoes that are in the middle strictly just should belong in the middle category? Or does a Brazilian population actually see that those people belong part of the black population? That's an article I'm going to do very soon because everybody's talking about it right now. So he continuing what he says. He says, when people ask me if every pardo is black or preto or negro, I always answer with another question. It depends on which brown, because let's remember that singer Caetano Veloso calls himself pardo. Alexandre Frota, who is a popular politician, also calls himself pardo. I have to come back to that. And these are people who we understand are socially read as white. But why do these people call themselves pardo? In some group dynamics that I've conducted as a result of my work, I did an exercise with people to ask them to declare themselves racially. And there I came into contact with people who were socially rated as white who declared themselves as pardos. So here you have blancos defining themselves as pardos, like in the article that I did a couple of weeks ago, where it says there are 6 new black mayors of Brazilian capital cities, and 5 of those guys clearly look white. So why are these white guys defining themselves as pardos all of a sudden? This is what he's asking. I realized that they did this because they understood that their self-declaration had to be in line with the color of their parents. Okay, that's another perspective. I wasn't looking at it that way, but let's keep moving. He continues. This means that people declare themselves as pardos to honor their fathers and mothers of different colors. This works for racial self-declaration, but for day-to-day racial reading, what is taken into account is the phenotype. In Brazil, they don't necessarily go by your ancestry. They go by what you look like to determine your racial or color classification. Although the Parditude movement claims a racial reading is based on genetics on racial mixing. In Brazil, basically, we have 2 types of ambiguous phenotype. Now, as you see, he pointed out the Parditude movement here. He's speaking specifically of Beatriz Bueno, who I've talked about. Her IG page is called Parditude, and her position is pardos are not black. Again, many pardos are not, but there is a sizable proportion of pardos who are considered negros in Brazil. He continues. On the one hand, people like, I think that's supposed to be Vanessa da Mata. It says Valencia da Mata, but the singer Vanessa da Mata, a very fair-skinned woman, loosely curled hair. In Ronaldo Phenomenal, the lighter skin of the 2 Ronaldos, who, although they have very light skin, have phenotypical characteristics of a black person, such as their hair, their features, and can in the future claim a blackness, both of whom have. Ronaldo the phenomenon he declared himself as a white man something like 15, 20 years ago. People were tripping about that. But in recent years, Ronaldo the phenomenon has identified himself as black, as has Vanessa da Mata. I did a video about her some months ago. Okay, let me see. Where am I here? On the other hand, we're going to have people with ambiguous phenotype like Caetano Veloso and Alexandre Frota, who, although they have tan skin, all of their phenotypical characteristics are read as that or those of white people. And these people can self-declare as brown, but they won't be read as black, which is an excellent point. But you're disregarding brown people of indigenous ancestry. No, he's making the point that I'm making. Within that Pardo category, there are people who are not purely white, but they lean closer to the white phenotype, even though they're being pardos. As I said, within pardos, you got people who look completely mixed, people who lean towards the white group, the indigenous group, and the black group, all within the pardo population. All of those people can be read as one of those 3 main groups. Guys, I'm discussing racial reading here, which is done by phenotype. People of indigenous descent, indigenous people, the way to offer racial identity is not done by phenotype. It requires other criteria. What I mean is that people can self-declare as pardo or brown, considering their ancestry, their genetics, but in everyday life, what counts is their phenotype. And another thing, we're all mixed race. If I do a genetic test here, I'll have indigenous, African, and European ancestry, but what counts in everyday life is my phenotype. The big problem is that when there's an NIM, okay, so this is going into the public exams for people to get into the university. It's a competition. In election year, every brown person becomes black. Listen to what he's saying here. I really like what he broke down because it's in line with what I'm saying. All Brazilians, 90% of Brazilians are going to be of mixed race to whatever degree. It just so happens that phenotypically, some of them are going to look closer to white, some are going to look closer to indigenous, some of them are going to look closer to black. That's the whole point here. The guy speaking right, I'm sorry, I said Marcelo or Marcio. His actual, I believe his name is Model, if I'm not mistaken. Model Bahasho or something like that from his Instagram channel. I agree with what he's saying. I think that one day we'll need to rediscuss the statute of racial equality, which says that everyone who self-declares as brown is black, because this is a statute that was created to combat racial discrimination and creates policies for discriminated populations. There are a lot of people there who self-declare as pardo, don't see themselves as negro. Brown people who don't see themselves as black, as a potentially discriminated population, and there's something wrong there. So everything that he's saying is what I've been saying for several, like the last few years. I think my position on race in Brazil changed probably about 5 years ago. And we have to acknowledge that what the Movimento Negro is saying is that if they're pardos, they should be considered black. But we have to change that because not all pardos will be clearly black. Some of them will be close to the indigenous and just like almost white. So it's wrong to classify all pardos as black, but it's wrong to also say that no pardo is black. Because as we see here, the title of the article says that 6 out of 10 pardos don't consider themselves black, but that means that 4 out of those 10 consider themselves black, which is on par with what I've been saying. Yeah, I'm going to put this into, I'm not going to use a whole lot of other links, but I just wanted to point this out also. He brought up Caetano Veloso, which is this guy here. This is a younger picture. You know, Caetano Veloso is like 82 now, as is Gilberto Gil, who's 82. What my point was that if we consider that both of these guys are of mixed race, if we put all Brazilians in the pardo category, and there are some who look black, some who look white, some who look indigenous, who's going to have the advantage? If these two guys were not famous and they were trying to go for a job and they're both mestizos, if living under white supremacy where people believe whites are superior, which one of these two guys gets the job? So just claiming that everybody is pardo does not rectify, it does not change the situation. Now, this is the article that I put out in 2019 that said the majority of public university students now are black. And I had to disagree with that. This is one of the first times that I had to change my position on this idea that all pretos and pardos should be considered black, because even the people that I knew, Americans that were living in Brazil, say, I haven't seen that. The only way you can say that universities in Brazil are majority black, the federal university, is you only consider with the pardos, a large percentage of pardos being very fair skinned. So they saw the same thing. And I'm just like, that's when I had to start changing my position to say not all pardos should be considered black. Absolutely, I agree with that. Now, this article from 2019, also the month of Black consciousness, I cover every year. I wanted to point out something that one of the studies that I was talking about that confirms that depending on who you're looking at, how that person self-identifies and how the researcher identifies that person, it's not always the same thing. So in this story, it says, the data speaks directly to my recent post on why we should stop saying that Brazil is a black majority country. In a 2009 article, University of California, Irvine professor Stanley Bailey found that when the term pardo was removed as a choice of identification among people participating in a study, with only branco, white, or negro, black being available, almost half of the pardos chose the term branco, meaning white. 10 years later, only 26% of pardos chose the category negro or black when given this choice. In other words, most pardos continue to see themselves not as black. And as such, I asked why all of these people should be included as part of the black population. This is what my point has always been. Well, at least since 2018, 2019, we had all of these cases of fraud, people trying to get into the university by defining themselves as pardos, when all of their lives they probably defined themselves as white. And this is at the center of why we can't say how many black people there actually are in Brazil. If we're going to use the extreme, like all pardos are black, then we're going to say that there's 200, maybe about 115 million black people in Brazil, whereas we take only people defining themselves as preto is only going to be about 9, well, now about 22 million. Again, my estimate is somewhere in the middle. I would estimate it would be somewhere between 60 and 75 million black people in Brazil. That's just how I see it. People are free to disagree. But according to what this study is saying, if 4 out of 10 pardos consider themselves black, I came up with a number of about, I don't know, I think it was like 35 million out of like 93 million pardos, or 35 to 40 million could be considered black, which would give me my number of about 60 million. And even within that category, it could be 1% higher, 1% lower. I'm comfortable saying there's probably 60 to 75 million black folks in Brazil. That's just how I see it, but we all have different opinions on that. Anyway, I like the article from Fordia because it validates what I've believed about the black population in Brazil. So anyway, definitely look into some of the articles I've featured in the past, some of the videos that I named earlier in this video, to go back and just look and see. This is something that I've been talking about for a minute. Curious to know what you thought about today's video. Drop a comment in the comment section. Love to hear from you. Like this video, share this video, subscribe to the channel. Consider, click on the notification bell. Then that way you'll know when I put up a new video. And with that said, going to end this video here and request that you all come back. Check out the next video that I post here at Black Brazil Today.